All right, hi everyone. Thank you. Oh, some people said hello. Hello. I hope you guys are doing well. Thank you so much for coming, especially right after lunch and with the gesture tracking. Oh, that means a lot. So I love that you guys are here. This is a really, really important topic, I think, for the industry today. It's especially close to my heart in the sense that this is the way I discovered VR was actually through a research project when I was trying to find a solution to a problem, and VR just emerged as a natural solution because it needed an immersive element. So in that process of doing all that research, I learned over and over again there was a lot of assumptions that I was making that I didn't realize I was making that seemed on the surface that like this is definitely A plus B equals C, this is a solution for this, and then I would do it using VR, and then I would test it out and find out like it was not having the intended impact that I thought was going to happen. And so I'd have to go back to the drawing board and do a lot of more research, and what I found was the missing link was the way that our brains react to different experiences. So I was studying the technology and I was studying the problem, but I forgot the third element of how our brains are actually wired. So thankfully, because I was doing this in school, I didn't have the burden of time being against me in terms of taking the time to do due diligence and understand the impact that I was doing, and the impact that my was going to have, my VR experience particularly, and also took the time to be able to determine like what metrics were going to be important for me to understand the impact that I was having on different levels. Not only was I able to understand the different metrics that was going to happen, thanks to most of these people who are sitting on this panel, the work that they've done, that I was able to Google. But finding out the impact that I would have on people and understanding the metrics neuropsychologically that it could have, but also too, like whether my product was effective or not was another thing that I needed to figure out, and I felt like VR was uniquely positioned to allow me to have more accessible ability to understand like what impact is what is the quality of the product that I was putting out there using VR. And then lastly, it was able to give me a sense of like what the return on investment would be. And I think this is important for the industry as we grow and as it starts to adopt enterprise training and scaling it out to new audiences. Being able to put their money on something, they're going to be spending a lot of resources putting it all, setting everything up, building infrastructure to support this, but they don't kind of, but also too with this, they'll also be able to ascertain what type of impact this investment that they made, what returns it will bring to them. So the panelists that I'm going to introduce to you, I'm going to go ahead and, they're all very accomplished people, so bear with me as I read through their bios. But they're going to be able to give us those insights and share with you like what best practices to take from a research perspective and from various different points, which we'll see as we go along through the talk. So the first person I want to introduce, and I'm so excited to be here, that she's here, is Dr. Grace Ahn. Feel free to come up. She is a University of Georgia professor and the founding director of the Gaming and Virtual Environments Lab. She brings over 15 years of experience studying how VR shapes the way we think, feel, and behave in the real world. We can sit down. I'm going to sit down. Second, we have Dr. Courtney Cogburn. She is an associate professor at the Columbia University and faculty of the Columbia Population Research Center. She employs a transdisciplinary research strategy to improve the characterization and measurement of racism and in examining the role of racial inequities in health. Third, Jessica Outlaw. She is a culture and behavior researcher in immersive tech. She's also the founder of the Outlaw Center for Immersive Behavioral Technology. She uses behavioral science to help XR companies build and test experiences. She does research in digital worlds, app designs, and provides training to new and experienced designers. And last but not least, Tony Bevilacqua. I'm sorry if I messed up. He is the founder of Cognitive3D, a Vancouver-based virtual reality and augmented reality analytics company. Prior to founding Cognitive3D, Tony was the co-founder and chief product officer for Kinetic, focused on mobile analytics and insights for enterprise, which was acquired in 2015. Congratulations. Let me see if this slides. I feel like I'm pressing the button. It's not working. Bear with me, technical difficulties. Okay, great. I'm so sorry, I should have put the headshots going on. But. Okay, that's Courtney. That's Jessica. And Tony. Great. So first, thank you. All right, so first question goes to Grace. So I've been following your work for a while. Like I said, I was in grad school. This was in 2015, and I was looking for proof that I wasn't crazy and looking for VR as a solution for trading. And sure enough, I saw 2 different published articles. One of them really stuck up to me. They're both published in 2014. One was a work that you had did when you were at University of Georgia, focused on soda consumption. And then there was a second one that you did on environmental VR for changing environmental impactful behavior. Yes. Can you speak about those projects that those specifically, and we have slides that I'll showcase as you're talking about it, but also talk about your research approach to it, what your objectives were, how you measured impact, and what that experience was like.
Yeah. I've been told to keep this under 4 minutes. I could go on and on and on for days about it. Professors, right? But in essence, I think what really fascinates me about virtual reality and using it in the context of training is that it's able to really change behaviors in unprecedented ways that we couldn't do with other more traditional media platforms. And so at University of Georgia, we're trying to see if we can apply virtual reality to deliver risk in very palpable, visceral ways so that we're able to get you to imagine future consequences in a much more realistic way. For instance, the soda consumption studies was a series of 6, 7, 8 studies that we continue to run in terms of trying to get people to imagine what it's like to face negative future health consequences in a much more realistic way. And so in this simulation, you just saw a person drinking a regular can of sugar-added beverage, so soda. And on the digital scale, you're basically seeing and hearing the fat fall from the ceiling. And the avatar is essentially gaining 20 pounds over 2 years in time, which is essentially what a lot of the pamphlets will tell you, except when you go to the doctor's office and they hand you a stack of pamphlets, what do? You basically throw them in the trash. And so we're using virtual reality to highlight this information in a much more personalized way. We are able to create photorealistic avatars so that it's not just about anyone else, it's about you, looking at yourself and what happens in terms of the consequence in the future. We did a very similar thing for the environmental behavior, which was a part of my dissertation studies. And so in this world, you walk into a virtual forest, you hear birds chirping, winds rustling, water's running. It's a very beautiful, serene place. You're asked to cut down and use the haptic device that you see in the picture on screen. And you're holding on to this electric saw. You're feeling the vibrations of this saw as you cut down this beautiful redwood tree in front of you. And as this tree trunk falls to the forest floor, then suddenly the birds stop chirping, water stops running, wind stops rustling. It's a very visceral experience of you having done something bad. And the control condition was where participants were able to read a pamphlet on deforestation. And we compared both of these conditions, not just on intentions to reduce paper use, but we also measured actual behavior by having them fill out a paper form survey. And as they were doing this, I accidentally knock over a pre-measured cup of water. And as they are helping me clean up this water, we hand them a pre-counted stack of paper napkins. So we hand all of the participants pre-counted napkins, and we count up the number of napkins that they actually used as our measure of paper use. And it turns out that when you have this visceral experience of cutting down this virtual tree in front of you, you end up using less than 25% less paper napkins to clean up the water versus people who said that they would use less paper, but actually read just the pamphlet on that. And so you can see how the visceral experience actually sticks with you in ways that lead to real behavior change. So intentions are very different from actual behavior change. We see over and over again that VR is strong enough in terms of its persuasive powers to get people to actually change their behaviors.
That's deep. Great, thank you so much. Courtney, you are the lead creator of 1000 Cuts Journey, an immersive VR experience of racism. And I think something you both have in common is that both, I think this project and the 1000 Cuts Journey was a joint effort with Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab, yes. Which is cool. So yeah, can you tell me about that project, how you approached it? I got to demo it last year, and I just remember it easily was the most powerful experience I've ever had. I was processing it for a week. I've tried a lot of different bias training experiences, and this one was definitely, and especially for perspective taking and empathy, it was really, really uniquely done in the sense that it was very contextual and holistic. Can you talk about that project, how you designed the metrics for that, what you guys were trying to learn, and what have you learned in general? I want to make the point that this is probably one of the largest growing use cases for VR training in the workplace. So it's really important that you've been doing this for a couple years. Yeah. There was a lot of learnings I think the industry should understand before they take on this venture full on.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that I had never used VR when I first wrote the proposal to fund this project. But I collaborated with this team at Stanford, the Virtual Human Interaction Lab, because I had this sense that people were disconnected from the type of data that I was collecting on the other aspects of my life. That it wasn't really landing, it wasn't registering. People weren't really understanding the nature of racial inequality and issues of racism in our society. So I started to wonder if you could walk in the digital shoes of someone else, perhaps you might imagine in a different way. So the piece that we created, again, this very collaborative process, but we landed on you becoming a black male at 3 different points in a black male's life. So as a child, an adolescent, and as an adult, experiencing racism in different ways, in different contexts over time. And I won't go into detail about the different scenes, but really we wanted you to feel small, we wanted you to have small hands, we wanted you to sit on the floor, throw blocks. We designed the piece using existing empirical data to think about what do we know about disciplinary practices in the classroom by race? What do we know about policing and stop and frisk practices in New York City? What do we know about discrimination in the workplace? And try to incorporate those elements into this experience. Some of the experience are very blatant and in your face. So in one scene, you're just standing on a sidewalk and the police come up because they're looking for someone who's dressed similarly to you and tell you to get down on your knees and put your hands up. And we have you, the user, get down on your knees and put your hands up. So we want you to physically use this body. And Jeremy, we think about interactivity in these very physical ways. But in other scenes, we make you feel invisible and dismissed and ignored and diminished, which is actually really hard to do. That's something that's really hard to achieve, but we wanted to capture subtle experiences and not just the things that are always sort of blatant and in your face, to convey that it's much more complicated than that. So we premiered that piece at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2018. And we had people, it was actually one of our first metrics, was to have people write on the walls when they came out of the experience to talk about how they were feeling. And some of the quotes that were pulled, people coming back later and saying that they couldn't stop thinking about it, that it was a really meaningful and deep way for them to connect. And these are people who think about these issues, right? These are people who follow these issues in the news, but were saying to us that they were connecting with it, not in an intellectual way, but in an emotional and more personal way, which is exactly what we were hoping to do. So now we've just run several studies similar to the type of work that Grace-Ann described, where we're interested in, from a psychological perspective, what effect are we having on people when they go through an experience like this? So we're certainly interested in empathy, we're interested in implicit bias, but I think what's more important from my perspective is not just assessing whether people feel bad or whether they're having an emotional experience, but I'm interested in whether people act and think differently as a result of going through this sort of experience. Do you change your behavior? Don't just tell me that this is just awful, this racism thing. Are you acting differently? And so now we're measuring that effect and then thinking about ways to integrate it in organizations as a training tool. And so one, we think the VR is powerful in and of itself, but what we think is most powerful is how the VR may set you up for important conversations coming out of the VR. That the data may take on different meaning, the types of conversations we ask you to have around these sorts of issues may unfold in a really different way if we're all starting from this place.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm excited to deep dive into that. Like, we're gonna go back into we're going to come back and ask follow-up questions, but I think what you're hitting on is how this enters the workplace is going to be an interesting point to talk about in terms of limitations and stuff. Yeah. Jessica, you're an independent researcher, but specifically from the UX perspective, you've become a community expert, particularly on onboarding new populations onto VR. I think you're very renowned within the community in understanding like what the actual impact on emotions and how people are actually interfacing with VR as a technology in general. You've done many different projects, but one of the big ones that I think was a real great offering for the community was a blog that you wrote partnered with Mozilla in terms of understanding what are the best use case studies for, but what are the best methods and practices for doing UX testing and just principles when you're doing it with VR. Can you talk about that project a little bit more detail and what your learnings from that were?
Yeah, for sure. Before I do that, I have a question for the audience. So raise your hand if you have done UX testing with like friends, family, coworkers. Okay. All right, and then raise your hand. So how much was that? I didn't see this.
That looked like 90%.
Okay. All right. So now raise your hand if you've actually like recruited people who who fit a specific demographic that you want to talk with. Okay.
Went down to like 80, 75.
All right. All right. No. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. Okay. So that's if you've done it at least once. Keep your hand up if it's been 2 times. 3 times? 4 times?
This is some heavy UX research. Legit.
Okay. All right. Everybody can put their hands down. All right. That's so. It seems like everybody has some familiarity in like trying to figure out like, does this work? Courtney, put on this headset right now, yeah. And getting that really immediate feedback. And then there's this other group, like another segment of the folks in here who have really like thought about who is this target demographic? Who am I going to specifically recruit for? Whose feedback do I really, really want to learn? And then there's some people who may even be UX researchers who are running those multiple studies. So you can see, like, one of the reasons that I was asking that is I'm trying to just acknowledge that it does take an extra amount of work to recruit a target population to get their feedback, because it is a lot easier for us to find those people who we see every day and get their feedback. But it also means that we might oversample on one particular area rather than whoever our target audience is. So the reason that I wrote this blog post is because Mozilla had hired me to do a series of user research on their social VR platform called Hubs. And just as I was writing up the protocol and trying to figure out what would be the questions that I could ask people, I was relying a lot on my previous years of experience being a UX researcher and writing those protocols. But there didn't seem to be something out there already that was a reference guide that other people could use. And so that's why I published this. So I basically published a version of the protocol that I used about recruiting participants, identifying exactly whose feedback I was interested in getting. So this was a study that was all about social VR usage. So the criteria that people had to meet in order to qualify for this was they had to bring someone to the lab with them who they communicated with virtually already. So they had to use some sort of virtual communication to even qualify for the study. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't want to put 2 random people in a conference room and get their feedback on what's it like to use this new communication platform with each other, because that wasn't the feedback that I was interested in getting. Another thing that I always try to do when I do user research is really try to examine specific behavior. So Grace described in her study a very specific behavior that she studied. She counted out the number of napkins before people even came into the lab. She measured out the water, she counted out the napkins.
200 times.
Did you say 200 times?
She didn't do it, her research assistant.
the reason that I want to specifically call out like this specific behavior, like why is it important to actually measure the napkins? It's because it's one thing to talk about like people's attitudes or like how much did you like a product, but when you can really get to the point where you're able to measure count the number of napkins and get that quantified metric, like that gives you a whole other level of insight, and that's what we would call like the actual observed behavior. And I would just really encourage people, like if you're having trouble like identifying exactly what is the behavior that you can go, like what is your version of napkin counting, like really talk to another researcher. I mean, think about other studies that have been done. Maybe they've been studies in 2D industries, or just in like a 2D space to really identify like what is that specific behavior that I can measure, because that is what's going to give you the strongest research and the strongest outcome.
Yeah, I love that. So what I'm hearing from that too is like having a strong like what is the objective of
like a
thing,
quantifiable
like a targeted
metric.
objective, and then how do you quantify the soft skills or the soft type of actions into something that's countable and measurable. Love that. We'll circle back to that even more later, but we have to get to Tony, and I'm really excited for what you bring to this conversation in the sense of like how we actually visualize this data. So I think it's just a nice segue. So you specialize in, I think you've been in this market as well for a while. Like I think you've been here in this doing 3D data for 3 years. 3 years. So I feel like you're one of the pioneers in terms of exploring the different ways that we can view these data. Can you talk about, I think there's one project that I really liked that you had told me about. It was a retail consumer project, but these are these are really interesting metrics. Like what are the metrics that you guys were measuring, and how did you design the way that you would visually design?
Yeah, let's jump one far forward there.
There you go.
All right, so I came from the mobile analytics space, and back in 2016, well, we started in the company in 2015, but in 2016, we really started to try to apply, some of those metrics and capabilities to the virtual world and VR, early AR experiences. What we realized really early on is that this type of content needed to be measured differently. It was something, fundamentally different. It was something that needed kind of a new method to understand and quantify, user behavior. So 2016, we went about building a tool called Scene Explorer. Scene Explorer is a time series analytics tool that allows you to look at sessions on a one-by-one basis. So you install it into your existing application, and then you have this ability to look at, how a user progressed through the timeline, what are the things that they paid attention to, how did they behave with their hands, how did they interact with different digital objects within space. And we've just been that's the company. That's how we move forward. We found this kind of new way to do this, and it kind of unlocked a full kind of slew of new metrics and behaviors. If you think about how traditional research is typically done, this is obviously like a consumer research use case. So this is something we did with Accenture, Qualcomm, on behalf of Kellogg's. We also worked with In Context Solutions on this. In this particular study, they wanted to understand how a new product introduction would work, right? In a traditional method, we might use something like eye tracking on 2D-based content, right? Or something along those lines. Because we're using a 3D engine and we had the ability to do eye tracking within that engine, we had the ability to map behavioral data onto specific objects and actually register on an individual and aggregate basis, like where we are seeing engagement, right? So it wasn't qualitatively observed. It wasn't something that we went back and made observations later. We had hard metrics that we could go along with. So if we go to the next slide. In this one here, you can actually see that like the overall scene, every item that the user could have interacted with is something that is independently registered. And we're eye tracking within the scene to be able to identify fixations, gaze, time to fixation. So how long did it take for the user to notice a particular item? We also looked at things like sequence. So the user looked at X, Y, and then Z, and things like that. And it's really kind of unlocked in this particular space a new way to get really good measurements of what's going on, for a physical environment. To bring some validity to this particular study, we had two different cells. The first cell, we basically did a planogram with Kellogg's traditional method. So we used exactly the same planogram configuration that they normally would. They were introducing a new product. And then we introduced a secondary cell with the product in another location. The outcome of this particular study was that we could actually relocate the product out of the prime location within the planogram to another less prime location. And ultimately, that created a lift of 18% across the entire category, as opposed to just the particular product. So Kellogg's was able to avoid cannibalization of their revenue by looking at the data in different ways and from different angles.
Sweet. All right, and I think we got your projects down. All right, so now let's get to the questions. I'm sold. I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel like this is really exciting to hear all the different range that VR can have as an impact, and particularly now when we talk about this for enterprise training, where do you guys see, because I think all of you guys are now breaking into like leveraging all the knowledge that you have gained as researchers of VR, and you're getting solicited by workplaces, maybe unintended or not, but this market is really growing. Where do you see the limitations for VR training in relative to each of your different expertise? Feel free to anyone answer. I think Courtney would be interested.
Yeah, so in my space, now we're being approached by a lot of people who want to think about applying this in like diversity, equity trainings in corporations and that sort of thing. I think one of the, I won't describe it as a limitation, I'll describe it as a concern, is that people jumping into the space who don't actually have the skill set necessary to do the work. And it's really the sort of work, especially if you're thinking about social impact or measuring human behavior or impacting human behavior, you really need a multidisciplinary team that's thinking about the content and what you're trying to do. How does the human brain work?
Yeah.
How does human behavior work to design some of these tools? And I think one of the concerns I have is people jumping into the space because it's interesting, or they think there's money to be made, and they don't actually have the team necessary to develop substantive content. So that's a worry I have. I'll give you one example without naming any names, just in case you're in the room. But people, for instance, someone approached me about a project where they were interested in sexual harassment in the workplace. No one on the team had any background in that whatsoever, but they knew it was like, me too, hot topic, let's jump in, let's create a VR where you have to do X, Y, and Z. And the whole thing was incredibly problematic. It wasn't going to work, and they had no idea of how they were going to measure the effect of it anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think some of that is a concern for me.
So it's more so on expertise in the workplace into onboarding or integrating VR training that you feel like is the biggest limitation.
The type of teams that you put together to do this kind of work.
Right.
And I would build on that just to say that there's a tremendous amount of VR content out there already. And I think rather than like charging ahead with like, this is my idea, this is my singular vision, I'm going to execute it in the next 3 months, like I would really just encourage people to slow down and like maybe spend at least like a certain period of time demoing what is out there, talking to the people who are already in the space, who have already like been able to like conduct some research, and maybe are like working out interesting like interaction designs or interesting interaction mechanisms, because maybe it would make more sense to partner with other people in the space, and it would be more efficient to do that, and then you can actually build on like the connections that other people have, because I think there's so much content out there that you can learn from, rather than just adding one more
the wheel.
like really try to create signal and not add to the noise.
Right.
I would also add that having a very small-scale study within an enclosed space is a very different story, very different category from scaling up out into the field. And so we've been taking a lot of studies out into the field, into the wild. Right now we're working with the YMCA of Metropolitan Atlanta. We're going into 24 after-school programs, hundreds of kids using mixed reality. And trying to launch something at that scale is very different. You run into all sorts of infrastructure problems, training problems. People don't know how to use, they break things. Kids break things all the time. Parents are concerned, ethical issues, data privacy issues. And so I think when you're trying to do something like training, which involves hundreds of employees where you need to scale things up, things need to happen in phases, and after each phase you need a very thorough and rigorous and systematic evaluation. So you need to assess every step before you kind of keep going, so that you don't end up at a position where you're like, what just happened? It was a complete failure.
Right. Right. Like how, like start at the beginning and be like, how are we going to know if we're successful?
Yes.
And then like you can revisit that afterwards.
And I think it doesn't require, rigorous academic research in all cases. There's ways to introduce these metrics in meaningful ways. You find your metric, your target audience, and think about ways to measure that. It doesn't have to be a longitudinal, randomized control.
But I would agree with everything you guys just mentioned. I mean, we have clients that approach us that, they assume that we can just kind of install analytics and boom, ROI, like we're going to be able to just suddenly here we go, we can take this to management and we're done, and they have a terrible experience that doesn't have necessary ROI in it, right? So, I think that the content quality, the expertise of the content creation, and building something that addresses what you're looking for is ultimately key. And then tools like ours can obviously just give you that ability to measure that kind of out in the field with your employees and see how it's working with your workforce.
Okay, so this is good. So this is a great point. So basically expertise, making sure there's expertise to handling the onboarding and creation of these type of solutions. So talking to these companies and developers in the room that may not be the experts, but have this really great idea and they know that this solution is out there, how do they go about getting that expertise? Especially since within enterprise timelines, they usually need quick turnarounds. So what resources would you say are available, or how do you feel that researchers should be involved, and how should they be communicating with each other to make sure that research is involved in that development process?
I mean, I feel like they should be involved at every single process. But I have worked with companies who are quite unsure of the level that researchers need to be involved with in terms of the project. And so we'll usually have a conversation right at the beginning in terms of laying things out and what role would I play and for how long and at what point should I go in. And that's really helpful in terms of getting a practical understanding for all of the parties involved. But if you don't integrate the research from the very beginning, what happens is that the research becomes very reactive in terms of there's not much I can tell you outside of the fact that whatever you have right now works at this level. But if I were involved at the very beginning designing stages of the project, then it would have been much more substantive. It would have been front-end evaluation telling you what steps, directions to go to, rather than giving you a much more reactive perspective.
Mm-hmm.
A successful pilot to us usually comes in where they've thought through what the hypothesis is for the overall scenario, like what they're ultimately trying to prove, and it's been thought through from day one. They have an idea of the problem they're trying to solve for the business. Maybe they're trying to reduce cost of training, maybe they're trying to improve safety, and they have a number of internal as well as maybe even quantitative metrics from the experience that they want to be able to measure, to be able to kind of define what is success, right? So, perhaps it's better efficiency in a particular process. How long did it take users to complete that? How efficient were they, going through those experiences, or maybe it's something else that's going to be a little bit more difficult to measure, like, practical safety issues in the field that's going to take a lot more thinking to be able to actually quantify.
Mm-hmm. So it would be safe to say that all four might agree that there should be an actual research methodology approach to developing a solution using VR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you put together a panel of researchers.
All right, I'm gonna play devil's advocate now. All right.
You also brought up timeline and budget, and I would just also say that you can learn a lot about just from paper prototyping, even before you build things in VR. Like there's an element to user research that can be extremely low fidelity. Even if you're building a VR application, there's paper prototyping that I've used before to help think through all right, what is this flow going to be? Mm-hmm. There's also a bunch of augmented reality apps that you can use on your phone. There's Torch, Adobe Aero, and now there's Reality Composer if you have the latest version of iOS that's from Apple. And you can actually start to spatially lay things out to explain your ideas on an iPad or an iPhone or an Android phone. So you can really, really start to explain to people, this is what the potential like VR application is going to look like. And yeah, is it like low fidelity? Yes, but did you make it in under an hour? Yes. And so I just really want to like say there's a ton of like savings in terms of time and resources that can come from taking this design thinking approach.
Right. Okay. So let's hit that point home. I think that's an important one to make. What is the consequences of not having research into the process? I have 2 months to build something. I'm pretty sure my solution's right.
Yeah, because I think I get a lot of questions in terms of, well, if it's just me asking users whether they like the content or whether the equipment was comfortable to use, then why do I need a separate researcher? I can ask the user myself. Well, there is actually a science to asking these questions, and the way that we define things, the way that we conceptualize things need to be very exact so that they're measurable, they're quantifiable. It's kind of like how you would evaluate the performance of someone else. How do you do this when it's all fuzzy and it's vague? And so we know, or we are trained in terms of even asking the right questions in a particular way so that it's reliable and we're able to validate the ways that you're measuring user experience both in and outside of VR. And I think what's really high impact with all of these experiences is that the virtual experience, as you all may know, doesn't end in the virtual world. It transfers into the physical world, and it changes the way that people think and behave even after they've left the virtual world. And it needs to be a very much more quantified it's also qualitative as well in terms of measuring how their feelings and thoughts and behaviors are being changed for how long, and in comparison to what other platforms that they've been exposed to. So lots of different elements that are sort of vague until you're able to define it in a much more clear way.
Right.
Yeah, I think measuring human behavior and emotion is really hard,
It's hard.
to do. And so in all the ways that Grayson just talked about, I also think, though, that sometimes VR, it's complicated. I think VR is sometimes held to an unfair standard where it gets put under this magnifying glass. But I think that's in part rooted in we've made some big claims about what VR is doing without having the data to really support that, and people are pushing back on that, right? So are you really shifting empathy? Is it really going in the direction you thought it was going? Is empathy even the outcome that you should be focused on?
Right. Or what is empathy?
What is empathy? How would you measure that? What does that mean? Is that sufficient? And I think it becomes really, really important in spaces where you're thinking about social impact, you're thinking about influencing human beings. And I think we need to think about it not only in terms of marketing and business and enterprise and academic research, we need to understand what the virtual reality games are doing to people when they go through these. It's not the same necessarily as sitting and holding a controller, and I think there's not enough that we understand about what VR is really doing to people over long periods of time.
Right. I remember, Grace, you've done a study studying the impact of how long a VR experience has on a person. Like, do you remember those numbers? I always forget, but I know it's like something like 5 minutes, lasts 24 hours, or...
Well, we've done several studies where we will measure the immediate impact, and immediately afterwards, it's almost as if VR doesn't have a much more significant and meaningful impact compared to, let's say, reading a book or pamphlet or watching a video. But I think where VR shines is over time. So 1 week later or 2 weeks later, we'll ask the same participants again, what do they feel like? How was your behavior change? We'll measure behavior. And it seems like a lot of the times VR experiences last over time and doesn't really dissipate. It's really hard to forget all the sensory information that you receive from a VR experience, whereas something that you read in a pamphlet, something that you saw in a video is much easier to forget over time. And so we see over and over again that after a week, after 2 weeks, that few minutes of VR exposure lasts with them for a fairly long time, even after they've left the lab.
So for better or worse, right? You're giving people these virtual memories, so to speak, that might be impactful. We had a white woman who went through our VR experience, and several weeks later said she was standing on the street in New York and a police officer was walking toward her, and she got scared, and her heart rate increased and her hands started sweating. And she said, I've never been afraid of the police, but I was scared in that moment on that day, and she likened it to going through the virtual reality experience. Do I want to do that to people? Is that the sort of memory I want to leave people with? I have to think about what it means to create these experiences in VR.
If we see results in training where we're imprinting process on people and they can recall the behavior that they did within virtual reality and then take that out into the field, what you're saying here makes total sense,
Yep.
right? Like it's
Yep.
you're taking those behaviors and the things that you learned into the real world.
Yep.
Okay, so the last, 5 minutes, oh my gosh, time went by so fast. I wish we had like another 2 days for this. So I did a poll like out to the Twitter community, Twitter world, to ask, to see what the community had questions for you guys on. Some of you guys have already seen it because I tagged you all. But I'm gonna go ahead and ask some of them, and we're gonna try to do these lightning rounds. I think we can get these done in like 3 or 5 minutes. So first question, what VR metrics are overrated? And could it be considered possibly fool's gold in terms of VR capability?
Implicit bias.
Ooh.
Think of that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
No one else?
Keep
No one
going.
else? All right. Okay. So do you segment research by user demographics? I
Do
guess
what?
analytics too.
Yes.
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 Yeah, we've
when
done.
do you do that?
Well, when the different segments will have something interesting to say, like something, yeah. So I did a study where I only recruited people who were experts in spatial design. So I recruited people who were retailers, interior designers, and architects, and I only talked to them, and I did not talk to like just general people, because I really wanted like specific insights from them.
And you guys find that there's usually a difference demographically with responses to the same VR experience?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, at what point should a company or a developer pivot in the research and development process if results are not going in the direction that they'd like or that they already promised?
No, as soon as possible.
I mean, as soon as they surface data that tells them that things aren't working out, they should try something new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they shouldn't like hold out and like
Don't double down.
don't double down. How do you get significant results with low numbers of users?
Oh, you should not look
Don't
for
do that.
significance
Low
in
numbers
small
are-
numbers of users.
What was that?
You shouldn't look for significance in small numbers of users.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
frequent statistics are dead and no one should use them.
Wow.
So,
Wait, because that's interesting because there's like a myth like then, I guess, in the UX world. It's like if you user test with like 5 people, you get like 80% of your results.
That is a
No.
myth. I can tell you right now that that is a myth.
Okay.
that is
Squash that.
so the way that I would answer that question is that you can probably get 80% of your learnings. Like you can get a tremendous amount of research insights from a group of like a small group of people. But the thing is that if you're trying to extract a p-value and try to get a really small p-value, it's like you're going to have noisy data unless I would say like you need at least 50 people per cell to have like really reliable results.
Okay.
And so what I would say is that people are over relying on significance testing, and it's led to like tremendous problems in academia in reporting on significance testing on small numbers of people.
Because we
And-
just don't know if the results that you get from 5 people are reliable in the sense that if I test it with a different group of 5 people, is it still going to carry over? If I go over into a different country with a different set of new 5 people, is it going to carry over? So we just don't know with a very low number, even if you have a significant p-value or a statistically meaningful value, it just doesn't carry over. We just don't
So
know
you should
the
train your
effect
target
size.
audience to not ask you for p-values. That's what you should do.
That's right. Don't listen to that.
That's because like, yeah, just like Grace was saying,
Yeah.
you can still get a ton of insights, you can still get a lot of valid like research insights, but do not rely on p-values to sell your work. Like
Okay,
your work should have other meaning,
yeah.
and you shouldn't just be relying on like what one particular number is,
Yeah.
because it's a very noisy number.
Ah, that makes sense. Okay. So how do you set up control groups for non-VR participants?
Don't let them go through VR.
No.
Give them other types of, like Grace-Ann was talking about, like have them read a pamphlet, have them engage in a more traditional way, an alternative.
Yeah, we try to make sure to make both of the conditions fairly equivalent in terms of the amount of information that they get, so that we're not giving one a ton of information and the other no information at all. I think the only thing that we want to manipulate with the VR versus non-VR is that the information that the participants receive are equal. However, the platform in which they receive the information is different. And so I think you have to really think carefully in terms of what is it that you're manipulating? What is that one thing that's different between these two? And then you try to keep all other elements as equal as possible.
And there's multiple types of controls, right? So that you don't just have one type
Yeah.
of control. You may have different types of control comparisons that you're looking for in relation to your main treatment.
Cool, thank you guys. So 1 minute left, and this on a positive note, what are you most excited about for VR, maybe entering the enterprise space from your perspective?
I think I'm super excited that when I first started working with Jeremy at Stanford, our headsets used to be in 2006 $50,000. Yeah, $50,000, and I'm really excited at the fact that now it's just it's like maybe a third of the cost of a cell phone, a smartphone. And now the idea that we've had for such a long time, the idea of ubiquitous VR that's more commonplace is now feasible. I don't know if we're there yet, but it's getting there in terms of the accessibility. And so I think that's really exciting in terms of scaling up. And so we're trying to take a lot of the work that we've done in the laboratory and see how it holds out, it pans out when it is scaled up. And so that's pretty exciting for me now.
Cool.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if you're an airline pilot, you book time in the simulator. And I think we're kind of getting to a point with virtual reality, even augmented reality, where we have life simulators and work simulators. And I think that it's a really interesting, time to, be in this space. I think that the way that people work and the way that people consume knowledge is going to be completely changed.
Yeah. I'm excited about, we're doing work at Columbia, bringing people who aren't in the tech world at all, but bringing their domain expertise to tech. And so we're thinking about ways to intersect social justice, people who do community-based work, and bringing them to the technology, because I think their voices are incredibly important in the space.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be tremendously fun. Like, I've sat in so many terrible employee trainings when I used to be an employee. And I think I saw that Visa created a training for their employees to help them detect fraud, and it was basically a game, and they found excellent results. Their employees were much better at detecting fraud as a result of going through this VR game. And I don't know how they were teaching fraud detection before, but if I was given the choice, if I was given a choice, then I would want to do the thing that was more fun and was definitely effective.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much again. Oh my gosh, this is exciting to talk to you all and to get all this information from you. I know there's going to be a lot of questions, especially on the practical side, that you guys might want to ask. So we will be in the speaker pavilion for the next 30 minutes after this talk. Feel free to hang out with us and ask us any questions that you have there. You guys are able to come to the... Yeah, okay, great. Everybody will be there. All right, thank you very much.
I'll see you there.